The blistering Texas sun beat down on the back of Jedidiah Stone's neck, a relentless hammer that promised no relief. Jed steered his old pickup truck along the dusty fence line of the sprawling, 10,000-acre ranch. He managed his eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 40 of his 60 years reading the subtle language of the land at his age. Most men were thinking about retirement, about rocking chairs and grandkids, but Jed found his solace herein. The vast, unforgiving landscape of the Texas hill country. It was a place that didn't demand conversation, a place where the silence was as honest as the hard-packed earth. He was checking the northern perimeter, a remote and rugged section of the fine ranch where a lone bison bull had been spotted a few days prior. The animal was a magnificent anachronism, a throwback to a time before fences and property lines. A 2,000-pound ghost of the Wild West Park Service had tagged him and named. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Him Titan, but the local ranchers just called him Trouble. He was a rogue kicked out of the Yellowstone herds for his aggressive temperament and had wandered south over the years. A solitary and unpredictable force of nature, yet's job was to ensure Titan didn't break through the fences and mix with his carefully bred cattle, or worse, wander onto the highway. As he rounded a bend thick with mesquite and prickly pear, he saw him Titan was standing in the middle of the service road, blocking the path. His massive head was low, his shaggy brown coat was covered in dust, and his dark eyes held a strange and unsettling light. It wasn't the usual aggressive glare Jed had seen before. It was something else, a wild, tormented energy that set every nerve in Yet's body on high alert. "Easy there, big fella," Jed said softly, stopping the truck a safe 50 yards away. "This is my road, not yours. Let's just be reasonable now." He honked the horn, a short, sharp blast that usually sent any wandering livestock scattering, but Titan didn't move. He pawed the ground, his massive hoof sending a cloud of red dust into the air. Then he let out a low guttural bellow, a sound that vibrated through the truck's chassis and settled deep in Yet's bones. This was wrong. Jed knew it instantly. This wasn't territorial behavior. This was something else. Something was agitating the bull, pushing him past his usual wariness and into a state of pure, unadulterated rage. Following ranch protocol, Jed grabbed his rifle from the rack, not to shoot the animal, but to fire a warning shot into the air, a loud noise to spook him into moving. He stepped out of the truck using the door as a shield and fired a single shot into the empty blue sky. The crack of the rifle echoed across the plains, but Titan's response was the opposite of what Jed expected. The sound seemed to trigger him like a key in a lock. He let out another explosive roar and charged. Jed had faced down charging bulls before in his rodeo days, but this was different. This was not the controlled fury of an arena animal. This was the elemental force of the wild, untamed and unstoppable. There was no time to get back in the truck, no time to aim another shot, no time for anything but a single whispered curse as 2,000 pounds of enraged Bison closed the distance in a terrifying blur of speed and power. The impact was like being hit by a freight train. Jed felt a searing, white-hot pain as one of Titan's horns ripped through his thigh, tossing him through the air like a rag doll. He landed hard, his head cracking against a large rock, and the world exploded into a shower of black and red stars. As he lay there bleeding in the dust, the last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the massive silhouette of the bison standing over him, its chest heaving, its dark eyes burning with a fire as old and as merciless as the land itself. The first thing Jed became aware of was the rain, cold and persistent, soaking through his shirt and pooling in the dust around him. His head throbbed with a pain so intense it felt like his skull was splitting apart, but it was the fire in his leg that screamed for attention. He tried to move, but a wave of nausea and dizziness washed over him, leaving him breathless and weak. He was alive, that much was a miracle. But for how long? He was miles from the ranch house with a shattered leg and a severe head injury. No one would find him until morning. If then he was going to die out here alone under the vast, uncaring Texas sky, then he sensed a presence A shift in the air, a warmth that didn't belong in the cold rain. He forced his eyes open, and his heart nearly stopped. Titan was still there, standing over him, a silent, mountainous shadow against the gray storm-tossed sky. The bison hadn't left. He was just standing there watching him die. But as Yet's vision cleared, he saw that something was different. The rage was gone from the animal's eyes, replaced by that same strange, agitated energy from before. Titan wasn't gloating. He wasn't threatening. He was just there. And then Jed realized the rain wasn't hitting him anymore. The bison's immense body was shielding him from the downpour, its massive form a living umbrella protecting him from the elements. What in God's name? Jed whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Titan shifted his weight, letting out a low, soft rumble. The sound wasn't threatening. It was almost comforting. Drifting in and out of consciousness, Jed watched in a state of surreal disbelief as the bison that had nearly killed him now stood guard over his broken body. The afternoon faded into a long, cold night. The storm passed, leaving behind a sky brilliant with stars and a silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and Titan's steady breathing. Jed shivered uncontrollably, the blood loss and the cold working in tandem to sap his remaining strength. He knew hypothermia was setting in, that he would likely be dead by dawn. But Titan remained. He didn't graze, he didn't wander off. He stood his vigil, his warmth radiating outward, creating a small pocket of relative comfort in the frigid night air. At some point during the long dark hours, Jed heard a new sound, a faint high-pitched cry that seemed to come from the tall grass nearby. Titan's head immediately lifted, his ears swiveling toward the sound. He rumbled softly in response, a call of reassurance. It was then, in a moment of startling clarity, that the unbelievable truth dawned on Jedidiah Stone. He looked past Titan to the rustling grass and saw a pair of small ears poke up, followed by a wet nose and two wide dark eyes. A newborn bison calf, no more than a day old, was hidden in the grass. Titan wasn't a rogue bull. He was a she, a new mother, and her attack hadn't been an act of malice. It had been a desperate act of protection. She had seen Jed as a threat to her hidden calf, a predator to be driven away at all costs. "Oh, you poor girl," Jed whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." The new mother had attacked him to protect her baby, and now wounded and helpless, she perceived him as another vulnerable creature in her care, another being to be shielded from the dangers of the wilderness. Her maternal instinct was so powerful. It had overridden her fear of him, encompassing him in its fierce protective embrace. If this incredible story of a mother's fierce love and an unbelievable act of forgiveness is touching your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales that prove the bonds of compassion can form in the most unexpected ways. As dawn broke, painting the horizon in shades of soft pink and orange, Jed knew he was living on borrowed time, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He was humbled, awestruck by the profound and mysterious workings of the natural world. He closed his eyes, listening to the soft sounds of the mother bison comforting her calf, and the steady rhythm of the heart of the very creature who had attacked him, now standing as his solitary guardian against the coming day. The distant sound of an engine broke the morning silence. Jed recognized it as Sheriff Brody's patrol jeep. He was saved, but a new fear gripped him. Brody would see the scene, injured man and a massive bison, and he would do what any lawman would do. He would shoot the animal to protect the human. "No," Jed croaked, trying to push himself up, but the movement sent a fresh wave of agony through his leg. "Don't shoot her." Sheriff Brody crested the hill, and his jeep skidded to a halt. He stared in disbelief at the scene before him. His friend and neighbor, Jed Stone, lying bloodied and broken on the ground, and the infamous rogue bison standing directly over him. "Jed, stay still," Brody yelled, grabbing the high-powered rifle from his passenger seat. "I'm going to take care of this." He raised the rifle, the scope finding the massive silhouette of the bison's shoulder. "No, Brody, wait," Jed yelled, his voice raw with desperation. "Don't you shoot her. She saved my life." Brody paused, his finger hesitating on the trigger. "What are you talking about, Jed? That thing attacked you. I can see it from here." "It was a mistake," Jed gasped, pointing a shaky finger toward the tall grass. "She has a calf, a newborn. She was protecting her baby. Look." Following Yet's gesture, Brody saw the small head of the bison calf poke up from its hiding place. The sheriff lowered his rifle, his face a mask of confusion and amazement. "I'll be damned," he whispered into his radio. "Dispatch, I found Jedidiah Stone. He's alive but injured, and you're not going to believe this, but the bison that attacked him is now standing guard over him. It appears to be a female protecting a newborn." The situation was a standoff. Titan refused to move away from Jed, her massive body a clear barrier between him and the newcomers. Every time a rescuer tried to approach, she would lower her head and let out a warning rumble, not a threat of attack, but a clear message: "Stay back, he's under my protection." The calf, now named Grace by Jed in his delirious state, would occasionally cry out, and Titan would answer with a soft, comforting call. Her attention divided between her two charges, the injured human and her own baby. It was a scene that defied all logic, a display of maternal instinct so powerful it had adopted its own attacker into its fragile family. Dr. Aris Thorne, the local large animal veterinarian, arrived by helicopter an hour later. He was a man of science, a pragmatist who had seen it all. But even he was left speechless by the situation. He observed from a safe distance through binoculars. "This is unprecedented," he told Sheriff Brody over the radio. "Maternal aggression is common, but this protective transference is something I've only read about in obscure journals." She no longer sees him as a predator now that he's incapacitated and vulnerable. He's registered in her mind as something to be protected. It's a profound display of empathy. "Empathy or not, Aris, we need to get him out of there," Brody said. "How do we do that without putting her down?" "We can't," Dr. Thorne stated firmly. "If we shoot her, the calf will die, and besides, after what Jed has said, I don't think any of us have the heart for that. We have to gain her trust." What followed was a delicate and painstaking process that lasted for most of the day. Under Dr. Thorne's guidance, they brought water and left it at a distance. Titan watched them, her dark eyes missing nothing when she was convinced they were not a threat. She allowed her calf Grace to go and drink, and then cautiously she drank herself. Next they brought food, nutrient-rich hay for the new mother. Slowly, hour by hour, they built a fragile bridge of trust. Titan began to understand that these humans were not there to harm her or her children. They were there to help. Jed drifted in and out of consciousness, but during his lucid moments, he would speak to Titan, his voice weak but reassuring. "It's okay, girl, they're friends. They're here to help us." The breakthrough came late in the afternoon. Yet's condition was deteriorating, and they knew they were running out of time. Dr. Thorne prepared a sedative dart, not for Titan, but for Jed to ease his pain during the extraction. "This is the critical moment," Dr. Thorne said to the rescue team. "When we move toward him, she's going to react. We have to be ready." As the paramedics approached with a stretcher, Titan did react. She moved to stand directly over Yet's body, completely shielding him. Her muscles tensed and a low growl rumbled in her chest, but she didn't charge. She held her ground, a defiant mother protecting her family. The paramedics froze, but Jed reached out a trembling hand and laid it on Titan's massive leg. "It's all right, girl," he whispered. "Let them help me. I'll be back, I promise." Miraculously, the great bison seemed to understand. She took a single step back, her eyes never leaving Yet's face. It was just enough room for the paramedics to work. They quickly and efficiently loaded Jed onto the stretcher and began the slow retreat back to the waiting helicopter. Titan watched every second of it, her gaze intense and filled with an emotion that looked heart-wrenchingly like concern. As the helicopter lifted off, Jed looked down at the scene below. Titan and her calf Grace stood side by side watching them go. The last image burned into his mind before he passed out was of the mother bison, letting out a long mournful call, a farewell to the man she had nearly killed and then inexplicably chosen to save. Have you ever seen an animal display an emotion that seemed undeniably human? What do you think this incredible story says about the nature of forgiveness and compassion in the animal kingdom? Yet's recovery was a long and arduous journey filled with surgeries, physical therapy, and the slow process of mending bone and spirit. But through it all his thoughts were constantly on the 2 lives he had left behind on that remote Texas pasture. Every day he would ask Sheriff Brody for updates. How are they, Brody? Are they safe? And every day the sheriff would reassure him. They're fine, Jed. We're leaving food and water for them every day. That Mother Bison is taking good care of her little one, and she's waiting for you. I can see it in her eyes. The story of the cowboy and the bison had become a local legend, a tale of improbable rescue and interspecies connection that had captured the hearts of the community. The ranch hands who had once seen Titan as a dangerous nuisance now viewed her with a mixture of awe and reverence. They made daily pilgrimages to her pasture, leaving offerings of the sweetest hay and freshest water, all at a respectful distance. When Jed was finally released from the hospital 3 months later, his leg was still weak and he walked with a cane, but his first request was not to go home. It was to go see Titan. Sheriff Brody drove him out to the northern perimeter, the same spot where the attack had occurred. As they approached the pasture, Jed saw her Titan was grazing peacefully while her calf Grace, now a sturdy and playful 3-month-old, frolicked nearby. Titan lifted her head. The moment she saw the truck, her ears perked forward and she let out a low, rumbling call of recognition. She remembers me, Jed whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He got out of the truck and, leaning heavily on his cane, he made his way to the fence. Titan walked to meet him, her calf trotting curiously behind her. She stopped at the fence and looked at Jed, her dark eyes soft and intelligent. Jed reached out his hand and laid it on her massive head. Thank you, he said simply. You saved my life, girl. I'll never forget it. Titan leaned into his touch, closing her eyes in what seemed to be pure contentment. Grace, the calf, was more cautious, sniffing at Yet's outstretched hand before finally allowing him to stroke her soft fur. It was a family reunion as profound and as real as any human gathering. In the months that followed, a new routine was born. Every morning Jed would drive out to the pasture and spend hours with his unlikely family. He would sit by the fence talking to Titan, telling her about his day, his memories, his hopes. The great Bison would listen, her presence a calming balm on his weary soul. He watched Grace grow from a playful calf into a strong young heifer, always under the watchful and loving eye of her mother. The bond between the 3 of them was a silent and sacred thing, a testament to the fact that family is not always defined by blood, by the inexplicable connections of the heart. The story of their bond attracted the attention of Dr. Emily Cartery, renowned wildlife biologist who specialized in animal consciousness. She came to the ranch to study them. Her research eventually becoming a groundbreaking book called The Titan. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What we are witnessing here, Dr. Carter explained in an interview, is a profound example of post-traumatic bonding and redirected maternal care. Jed and Titan were brought together by a traumatic event, but that trauma became the foundation for a relationship built on mutual protection and trust. Titan saved Yet's physical life, but in many ways, he saved her emotional one by giving her a reason to trust again. The ranch became a quiet sanctuary, a place where people could come to witness the peaceful coexistence of the man and the bison, who had once been adversaries. They learned that forgiveness was possible, that healing could come from the most unexpected sources, and that the line between human and animal was far more blurry than they had ever imagined. One day, a few years later, a different kind of threat appeared on the horizon. Not a storm or a predator, but a notice from an oil company. They had bought the mineral rights to the land and planned to begin drilling operations on the very pasture that was Titan and Grace's home. Yet's heart sank. The noise, the machinery, the disruption. It would destroy the peace they had found. It would traumatize the animals and shatter the sanctuary they had built. He fought them with everything he had. He hired lawyers. He appealed to the state. He told their story to any news outlet that would listen. The community rallied behind him. The people who had once feared Titan now fought to protect her home. They held fundraisers, wrote letters, and organized protests. The story of the cowboy and the bison became a symbol for a larger fight, the fight to protect wild spaces and the creatures who inhabit them. The legal battle was long and grueling, and it seemed like a losing one. The oil company had money and power on their side. On the day of the final court hearing, Jed stood before the judge, his voice shaking but his resolve firm. "Your Honor," he said, "this isn't just about a piece of land or a single animal. This is about acknowledging that these creatures have a right to exist in peace. They have families, they feel love, and they feel fear. Titan saved my life. She taught me the meaning of forgiveness and compassion. To destroy her home for profit would be the greatest act of cruelty I can imagine." Just as the judge was about to deliver his verdict, a commotion was heard outside. The courtroom sheriff Brody burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "Your Honor, you need to see this," he said, leading everyone outside. In the town square below stood a sight that left everyone breathless. Titan and Grace were there. They had broken through their pasture fence and had walked the 10 miles to town following the scent of the man they considered family. They stood calmly in the center of the square, surrounded by townspeople who were not screaming or running but watching in silent awe. Titan looked up at the courthouse window directly at Jed and let out a soft rumble. The message was clear: we are here, we are a family, we will not be broken apart. The judge, a stern man not known for sentiment, looked at the scene below, then back at Jed, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Well, Mr. Stone," he said, "it seems you have some rather powerful character witnesses. In light of this unprecedented testimony, I am issuing a permanent injunction against any drilling on that land. The pasture is to be designated a protected wildlife conservation area, effective immediately." A cheer erupted from the crowd. The cowboy and the bison had won. As the sun set that evening, Jed sat with Titan and Grace back in their protected pasture. The world was quiet again, the future secure. He looked at the magnificent animal who had gored him and then guarded him, who had attacked him and then adopted him into her family. The attack had been unbelievable, but what happened next? The forgiveness, the friendship, the family they had built together. That was the true miracle there. Story became a powerful reminder that out of the greatest violence can come the greatest love, and that the most unbelievable events are often the ones that teach us the most about who we are and who we are meant to be. The years that followed the courtroom victory were a long and golden autumn for Jedidiah Stone. The Titan Conservation Area became a haven not just for the Bison family, but for the community's soul. The story of the attack, the rescue, and the town square standoff had woven itself into the fabric of local identity, a modern Texas folktale that people told with a mixture of pride and wonder. Jed, now in his late 60s, moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had made peace with his ghosts. His limp was more pronounced, a permanent reminder of his violent first encounter with Titan, but he carried it not as a wound, but as a badge of honor. A mark of the moment his life had been irrevocably changed for the better. Titan, the grand old dame of the pasture, had settled into a serene matriarchy. Her once tormented eyes now held a deep, placid wisdom. She spent her days grazing peacefully, her great shaggy head often tilted as if listening to secrets on the wind. She was the undisputed queen of her sanctuary, and the other wildlife seemed to understand it. The deer would give her a wide berth, the coyotes would skirt the edges of her pasture, and even the eagle circling overhead seemed to dip a wing in salute. And then there was Grace, no longer a gangly calf. She had grown into a magnificent bison in her prime, a perfect blend of her mother's immense strength and what Jed could only describe as her mother's soul. She possessed the same startling intelligence, the same deep well of empathy. Her bond with Jed was different from her mother's. It was less about shared trauma and more about a lifetime of gentle familiarity. He was the first human she had ever known, and she regarded him with a mixture of love and playful respect that was a constant source of joy for the old man. Their days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jed would drive out in his battered truck, no longer needing the cane, but still feeling the ache in his leg on damp mornings. Titan and Grace would greet him at the fence, and the three of them would spend hours in quiet companionship. Jed would talk to them about the changing seasons, about memories of his youth, about the simple daily occurrences on the ranch, and they would listen, their presence a solid comforting anchor in his world. But the long golden autumn could not last forever. A new threat began to creep into their lives, not a predator or a corporation, but something far more insidious and patient. The drought had started slowly, a few missed spring rains, a summer that was hotter and drier than any in recent memory. The vibrant green of the hill country faded to a parched and dusty brown. The creeks that laced through the ranch dwindled to trickles, then to cracked mud pans. The land itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for a release that never came. Jed watched the sky every day, his farmer's intuition screaming a warning. This wasn't a dry spell. This was a siege. The ranch's main well, which had served his family for 3 generations, began to sputter. The water that came up was thick with silt, a sure sign that the aquifer was failing. Other animals grew desperate. Deer, once shy and elusive, now ventured right up to the house, searching for water. The natural balance of the sanctuary was breaking down. Jed did what he could. He had water trucked in, an expensive and unsustainable solution. He set up troughs and filled them daily, but it was a losing battle. The sun was a merciless enemy, and the earth was dying of thirst. Titan and Grace felt the change. Titan grew restless, her calm demeanor replaced by a familiar agitated energy, a low-level anxiety that reminded Jed of the days before her calf was born. Grace, on the other hand, seemed to become more focused, her intelligence sharpening in the face of the crisis. She would spend hours staring out at the parched hills as if trying to puzzle out a solution, her gaze holding a strategic intensity that was startling in its focus. One evening, as Jed watched the last of the trucked-in water drain into the trough, he knew they had reached a breaking point. Another week without rain, and he wouldn't even be able to afford to keep them alive. He sat on the porch, his head in his hands, the weight of his helplessness a heavy shroud. Titan and Grace came to the fence and stood watching him, their silent companionship a comfort and a burden. He felt their trust, their faith in him to solve this, and he had no answers. Then a memory surfaced, a story his own grandfather had told him decades ago, a tale from the great drought of the 1930s about a place deep in the rugged backcountry of the ranch, a hidden canyon where a spring flowed from the rock even when all other water sources had vanished. They called it the Lost Eden Spring. My grandfather used to say that spring was the heart of this land. Jed whispered to his 2 companions, as long as it beats, the land will survive, but no one's been to it in 50 years. The trail is gone, swallowed by the wilderness. It's too treacherous for an old man like me to find. He pulled out an old hand-drawn map from his grandfather's journals, a faded and brittle piece of paper showing the general location of the spring. He spread it out on the ground near the fence. It's up there, he said, pointing to a cluster of canyons marked on the map, somewhere in that maze of rock and mesquite. What happened next was another moment in a lifetime of unbelievable moments. Grace, the young bison in her prime, looked at the map, then at the distant hills, then back at the map. She nudged the paper with her nose, her focus on the spot Jed had indicated. Then she looked directly at Jed, her dark eyes holding a clear and unmistakable question. Tell me where. Titan watched her daughter, her old eyes filled with a mixture of pride and maternal concern. She seemed to understand what Grace was asking. She let out a low rumble and nudged her daughter forward, a gesture of endorsement, a passing of the torch. You want to find it for us, don't you? Jed breathed in awe. You understand what we need. Grace answered with a determined snort and pawed the ground, her gaze fixed on the distant canyons. The decision was made. It was a desperate gamble, a plan so outlandish it sounded like a tall tale in the making. But it was their only hope. Grace, the daughter of the legendary Titan, would journey into the parched wilderness to find the lost spring and save her family. The preparation for Grace's quest was a somber and sacred ritual. Jed filled a set of durable canvas packs with as much water as they could hold and strapped them carefully to Grace's powerful shoulders. It was a heavy load, but she bore it without complaint, her focus entirely on the task ahead. Titan stood beside her daughter during the entire process, nuzzling her neck and making low, continuous rumbling sounds. It was not a conversation of words, but of instinct and inheritance, a mother, passing on generations of wisdom about the land, the dangers, and the paths that were not on any human map she was teaching her daughter how to survive. The final moments before Grace's departure were filled with a profound and heavy silence. Jed placed his weathered hand on her forehead. "Your mother saved my life, girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And now, you're going to save all of ours. Be careful, be smart, and trust your instincts. Your grandfather and I will be waiting for you." He looked at Titan and saw his own fear and hope reflected in her ancient eyes. They were two parents sending their child out into a dangerous world, trusting in the strength and wisdom they had instilled in her. Grace gave them one last look, a look of fierce determination, then turned and walked toward the parched hills, her silhouette a solitary figure of hope against the rising sun. For the next 3 days, Jed and Titan kept a constant vigil. Titan would stand on the highest point of her pasture for hours on end, staring at the spot where her daughter had disappeared. Her stillness was a form of prayer, a mother's silent plea set out into the wilderness. Jed spent his time pacing the fence line, his binoculars constantly scanning the horizon. His helplessness was a physical torment. He had always been a man of action, a problem solver, but now all he could do was wait and trust. Grace's journey was a brutal odyssey through a dying land. The sun was a relentless adversary, sucking the moisture from the air and baking the earth into a cracked and barren wasteland. The familiar landscape had become alien and hostile. The creeks she had known were now just ribbons of dust, and the trees were brittle skeletons reaching toward a merciless sky. She navigated by a combination of Yet's map, which she seemed to have memorized with a single look, and the deep instinctual knowledge passed down from her mother. She found the ancient game trails, faint indentations in the earth that no human would have noticed, and followed them into the rugged canyonlands. On the second day, she faced her first true test. She entered a narrow canyon and found her path blocked by a territorial mountain lion. The great cat was gaunt and desperate from the drought, its eyes burning with a hungry fire. It hissed and spat, seeing the bison not as a fellow creature, but as an intruder in its desperate hunt for water. Grace could have used her immense strength to charge to fight, but she did something her mother had taught her by example. She showed strength through calm. She stood her ground, but her posture was not aggressive. She simply waited. Her presence, a statement of quiet authority that the predator could not intimidate. After a tense standoff, the mountain lion, seeing no fear and no weakness in the young bison, finally yielded the path. Slinking away into the rocks, Grace had won not with violence, but with wisdom. The third day was the hardest. Her water packs were nearly empty, and the relentless heat was taking its toll. She was growing weak, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt entered her heart. Had she been foolish to think she could succeed where no one else had dared to go? She was resting in the sliver of shade offered by a rock outcropping when she caught a scent on the wind, a faint but unmistakable smell of damp earth and living green things. The lost Eden spring. Her energy renewed, she followed the scent, her pace quickening with every step. The trail led her into a narrow hidden canyon, its entrance almost completely obscured by a rockfall. She pushed her way through, and the sight that greeted her made her stop in her tracks. It was a paradise, a small lush valley, untouched by the drought. A spring bubbled up from a fissure in the rock face, feeding a deep, clear pool surrounded by ferns and mosses and vibrant green grass. This was the heart of the land, and it was still beating. Grace drank deeply the cool, clean water, a blessed relief to her parched body. She had found it. She had saved her family, but as she looked around the small, verdant canyon, she saw other eyes watching her from the shadows. Deer pronghorn, a family of javelinas, even the mountain lion from the day before. They had all been drawn here by the scent of water, their last refuge in a dying world. Grace looked from the desperate animals to the path she had created on her journey back. She knew what she had to do. Her mother had taught her that a true leader doesn't just save their own family, they care for their entire community. She took one last long drink from the spring, then turned and began the long journey home. But this time, she was not alone. The return journey was a spectacle. that would have humbled the kings of old Grace led the way, her pace slow and steady, and behind her followed a silent procession of the wild things, a parade of thirsty souls following their new queen to the promise of salvation when they emerged. From the canyonlands onto the plains, Jed saw them first through his binoculars. His heart leaped into his throat. "Titan, come look," he cried out, and the old mother Bison joined him at the fence. Together they watched as their daughter and granddaughter of the wilderness led a peaceable kingdom of deer, pronghorn, and even predators back toward the sanctuary. Grace had not just found water. She had brought the entire community of life with her. The procession moved with a solemn grace, the other animals keeping a respectful distance from each other, their shared desperation creating a temporary truce under Grace's leadership. When they reached the conservation area, Grace led them not to the empty trough, but to the source of the main well. She began to paw at the ground near the wellhead, digging with a focused intensity. It was then that Jed understood her final brilliant plan. She wasn't just leading them to him, she was showing him where the underground river that fed his well was closest to the surface. Inspired by her actions, Jed scrambled to his truck and returned with shovels and digging equipment. He was joined by Sheriff Brody and a handful of ranch hands who had seen the unbelievable procession from the road. Working together, man and beast, they dug for hours, following the spot Grace had indicated, until finally, with a gush of muddy water they broke through, they had tapped directly into the underground flow of the lost Eden Spring, a new and permanent source of water for the entire ranch. That evening, as water flowed freely into the troughs and the saved animals drank their fill, Jed, Titan, and Grace stood together on the hill overlooking their sanctuary. The drought was not over, but they had survived its worst fury. They had faced the end of their world and had found a new beginning together. Grace stood between her mother and the old man who was her grandfather in all but blood. The torch had been passed. She was no longer just the daughter of a legend. She was a legend in her own right, the new guardian of the Titan conservation area. Jed laid his hand on Titan's great flank and looked at Grace with eyes full of love and awe. The old cowboy, the wise mother, and the brave daughter stood as a testament to the enduring power of family, a family defined not by species but by a love that could make the land itself bloom again. In the face of despair, the cowboy, who was attacked by a bison, had seen it all now: an attack, a rescue, a legal battle, and now a miracle led by the next generation. His life had been saved and then given a purpose beyond his wildest dreams, all thanks to the unbelievable love of an animal he had once seen as nothing more than a dangerous beast. The years following the great drought were a season of deep and abiding peace on the Titan conservation area. The land healed, nourished by the life-giving water of the lost Eden Spring, and the sanctuary became a testament to the resilience of nature and the power of an unbreakable family bond. Jedidiah Stone, now well into his 70s, had finally accepted a gentle retirement. His days were no longer filled with the hard labor of ranching, but with the quiet contemplation that comes at the end of a life well lived. His limp was a constant companion, a map of his history etched into his very bones, but it was a pain he welcomed, a reminder of the violent miracle that had given him his truest purpose. Titan, the grand matriarch, wore her age like a crown of silver frost. Her movements were slow, her great head often bowed, not in submission, but in a kind of deep thought, as if she were reviewing the long ledger of her incredible life. She was the soul of the sanctuary, and her serene presence was a calming influence on every creature within its borders. And Grace, she was the living embodiment of their legacy in her prime. She was a breathtaking sight, a bison queen whose strength was matched only by her wisdom. She was her mother's daughter through and through, but she also carried a spark of Yet's human understanding, a unique empathy that made her a leader unlike any other. She was the undisputed guardian of the sanctuary, her watchful eyes missing nothing, her heart connected to every pulse of life on the land. The bond between the three of them had transcended into something for which there were no words. It was a shared consciousness, a silent language woven from decades of mutual trust and love. Jed would spend his afternoons sitting on his porch, and Titan and Grace would rest nearby on their side of the fence, a quiet council of 3 souls who had faced down death, darkness, and despair together, and had won. Their story had become a cornerstone of conservation ethics, a required case study in universities around the world. But Jed had quietly closed the sanctuary to most outside visitors. He knew that what they had was sacred, and he wanted to preserve its peace for as long as he could. He knew their time together was growing short. It was into this sacred peace that a new presence arrived, Dr. Maya Flores. She was a brilliant young veterinarian, a prodigy from Cornell who had already made a name for herself with her sharp diagnostic skills and cutting-edge research, but she was also deeply disillusioned, burned out by a world that too often treated animals as commodities and healing as a business transaction. She came to the Titan conservation area not as a tourist or a researcher, but as someone searching for a faith she had lost. She had read Dr. Carter's book, The Titan Effect, and wanted to see for herself if such a profound connection was truly possible. Jed saw the weariness in her eyes, the same brand of soul-deep exhaustion he had once felt himself. He saw her scientific skepticism warring with a desperate need to believe in something more. He agreed to let her stay for a month as a volunteer, an apprentice, not in veterinary medicine, but in the quiet art of listening. "You know how to fix their bodies," Jed told her on her first day, his voice a soft Texas drawl. "But out here you'll learn how to listen to their spirits." Maya was initially skeptical. She observed Yet's daily rituals with a clinical eye, watching him talk to the bison as if they were old friends. She saw the way Titan would respond with a low rumble, or how Grace would nudge his hand at a specific moment, but she attributed it to conditioned responses and anthropomorphism, not a true meeting of minds. The turning point came one afternoon, when a sudden thunderstorm rolled in with terrifying speed. A bolt of lightning struck an old oak tree near the sanctuary fence, sending a shower of sparks and flaming branches to the dry ground. A small grass fire ignited and began to spread, quickly fanned by the fierce winds. Maya's training kicked in. Immediately call the fire department. Secure the animals contained the blaze, but Jed remained calm. He simply stood up and walked to the fence where Titan and Grace were already watching the approaching flames. He didn't shout, he didn't panic. He spoke to them in a low, reassuring tone. Grace looked at her mother, then at Jed. Then she did something that shattered Maya's scientific certainty. She walked calmly to the newly opened wellspring, the one she had found during the drought, and began to stomp her powerful hooves in the muddy ground around it, churning the wet earth into a thick slurry. Then she walked back to the fire line and began rolling in the dry grass. Her body coated in the wet mud, she created a fire break, a wide swath of damp earth that the approaching flames could not cross. Titan stood guard watching her daughter work, her presence a silent command to the other animals in the sanctuary to remain calm. "She's using mud as a fire retardant," Maya whispered in utter disbelief. She assessed the threat, the available resources, and implemented a multi-step strategic solution. "How is that possible?" "She's her mother's daughter," Jed said simply, a deep pride in his voice. "And she's been listening her whole life." The fire department arrived to find the fire already contained by a perfect 10-foot wide fire break created by a bison. They stared in stunned silence as Grace calmly returned to her mother's side. Her work done from that day on, Dr. Maya Flores stopped being an observer and started being a student. She put away her data charts and her clinical detachment, and she began to learn the language of silence. She learned that Titan's soft rumbles could convey a dozen different meanings, from a simple greeting to a complex warning about a change in the weather. She learned that Grace's posture could tell you more about the health of the herd than any blood test. She learned from Jed that the deepest connections are not forged with words or tools, but with the simple currency of shared time and unwavering presence. As the seasons turned, it became clear that Titan was failing. Her great strength was ebbing. Her breaths grew more shallow, and she spent most of her days lying in the sun, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Jed knew the end was near, and his own heart felt heavy with a grief he had been preparing for years. "He's not in pain," Jed explained to a tearful Maya. "He's just tired. His work is done. Grace is ready to lead now. He's just waiting for the right time to go home." Grace never left her mother's side during those final weeks. She would lie beside her for hours, her body a warm and constant comfort. She would bring her the tenderest blades of grass and nudge the water trough closer so her mother wouldn't have to walk. She was not just a queen in waiting. She was a devoted daughter caring for the parent who had given her everything. It was a masterclass in love and dignity that left Maya humbled to her core. The end came on a quiet, starlit night. Jed and Maya sat on the porch keeping vigil. The entire sanctuary was still, as if all of nature was holding its breath in reverence. Jed felt a strange sense of peace settle over him, a quiet acceptance of the great circle of life he had witnessed so many times on this land. Around midnight, Grace let out a single low, mournful call, a sound that was not of grief, but of release, of final farewell. "He's gone," Jed said softly, his own tears finally falling freely. He didn't need to see, he could feel it. In the stillness of the air, a great spirit had just been released into the wild heart of Texas. They buried Titan on the hill, where she had loved to rest under a simple stone marker that read only Titan, a mother, a guardian, a queen. The days that followed were a blur of quiet sorrow for Jed. His own health, which had been so intricately tied to his friends, began to fade. His steps grew slower, his breath more shallow. He had completed his life's work, and his body knew it was time to rest. Maya became his caretaker, her medical skills now guided by a deep and profound empathy she had learned from a bison. She cooked his meals, she managed his medications, but most importantly, she sat with him on the porch for hours every day, listening to his stories of Titan, of grace, of a life lived in deep connection with the land he loved. "You see, Maya," he told her one afternoon, his voice a faint whisper, "it was never about me saving her or her saving me. It was about two broken souls finding each other and making each other whole again. We were a family, that's all." Grace seemed to understand too. She would stand at the fence for hours, just watching the farmhouse, her gaze fixed on the porch where her human grandfather was slowly fading away. She was the matriarch, now the powerful guardian of the sanctuary. But her heart was still connected to the two beings who had formed her entire world. Jedidiah Stone passed away peacefully in his sleep. 2 months after Titan, his final wish was to be cremated and have his ashes scattered on Titan's hill, so he could be with his friend for eternity. The entire town attended his memorial service, a testament to the quiet rancher who had taught them so much about love, courage, and the surprising intelligence of the creatures they shared their world with. But the true mourners were a young veterinarian with eyes now full of wisdom and a magnificent bison queen who stood on a distant hill, a solitary and regal figure watching over the land her family had saved a year later. Dr. Maya Flores stood on the porch of the old farmhouse. It was her home. Now she was the director of the Titan Conservation Area and the guardian of Yet's legacy. She had dedicated her life to continuing the work they had started, to building bridges of understanding between the human and animal worlds. A low rumble from the pasture drew her attention. She looked out and saw Grace standing at the fence waiting for her. Maya smiled and walked out to meet her. She placed her hand on the great bison's head and looked into her wise dark eyes. "Good morning, Queen," she said softly. "What lessons do you have for me today?" Grace nudged her hand in response, a gesture of trust and partnership. The circle was complete. The legacy had been passed. The story of the cowboy attacked by a bison had ended, but the unbelievable story of the family they had created would echo through the hills of Texas forever, a timeless reminder that the deepest love is born not of flesh and blood, but of a shared spirit, and that the most profound healing comes when we have the courage to protect the ones who are different from us, the ones who the world has deemed unworthy, the ones who just might be waiting to save us in return. The seasons turned, and the spirit of Jedidiah Stone and Titan settled deep into the land. The sanctuary thrived under the watchful eyes of its two new queens, Dr. Maya Flores, the human guardian, and Grace, the bison matriarch. Maya ran the center with a wisdom that belied her years, blending cutting-edge science with the profound lessons in empathy she had learned from Jed. She published papers, she mentored students, but her most important work was the silent conversation she held each morning With the magnificent Bison, who was the heart of it all, Grace had blossomed into a leader of quiet authority and immense dignity. She patrolled her domain with a serene confidence, her mother's strength flowing in her veins. But as the years passed, Maya began to see a familiar shadow in Grace's intelligent eyes. It was the echo of solitude. Grace was the last of her line, a queen without a court, a mother without a calf to nurture for the legacy of Titan, to truly endure for the sanctuary, to be more than just a beautiful memory. It needed a future. Maya knew what she had to do. She began a painstaking search, not for a bull, but for a king consort worthy of Grace. She consulted with conservation herds, geneticists, and animal behaviorists. Across the country, she was looking for a specific lineage, one known for calm temperament and high intelligence, a male who could be a partner, not just a sire. After a year of searching, they found him, a young bull named Kai from a protected herd. In the Dakotas, he had a gentle disposition and a curious nature that made him the perfect candidate. The plan was set. Kai would be brought to the Titan conservation area in the spring, but as Maya prepared for the arrival of new life, an echo from the past arrived at her doorstep. He was a 10-year-old boy named Leo, brought to the sanctuary by a child psychologist who was at her wit's end. A car accident had claimed his parents 6 months prior, and since that day, Leo had not spoken a single word. He lived in a fortress of silence, his eyes vacant, his small body coiled with a grief so profound it had locked his voice away. "I read your research, Dr. Flores," the psychologist explained, "and yet story, I thought maybe, just maybe the quiet here could help. I don't know what else to do." Maya looked at the small boy and saw a reflection of every broken soul that had ever found refuge on this land. She saw Yet's loneliness, Titan's trauma, and Alara's silent pain. She agreed without hesitation. Leo began visiting the sanctuary every day. He would sit on the porch of Yet's old farmhouse, a silent little ghost surrounded by a world of vibrant life. He showed no interest in the animals or the landscape, his gaze always fixed on some distant point. Only he could see. Maya didn't push him. She would simply sit with him, sometimes talking softly about the history of the ranch, sometimes just sharing the silence. One afternoon, she gently coaxed him to walk with her to the sanctuary fence. Grace was there, resting under the shade of Titan's memorial oak tree. When she saw the small, silent boy approaching, she did something she rarely did with strangers. She rose to her feet and walked directly to the fence. She stopped in front of Leo and lowered her great head. Her dark, intelligent eyes looked into his empty ones, and for the first time since he had arrived, a flicker of something moved across Leo's face. It was a moment of profound recognition, a silent meeting between two orphans who understood the language of loss in a way no one else could. From that day forward, Leo's silence found its focus. Every day he would walk to the fence and sit with Grace for hours. He never spoke, but he began to draw. He filled sketchbook after sketchbook with charcoal drawings of the Bison Queen. He drew her strength, her gentleness, her solitude. He drew the wisdom in her eyes and the quiet power in her stance. It was his first act of expression, his first step out of the locked room of his grief. The day Kai was scheduled to arrive was filled with a nervous energy. Maya knew that introducing a new bull was a delicate and potentially dangerous process. Grace's acceptance was not guaranteed. Maya brought Leo with her to the introductory paddock. She felt his small, silent presence would be a calming influence on Grace. When the transport trailer backed up to the gate, Grace grew tense, her body coiling with uncertainty. As the ramp lowered and the new bull, Kai, stepped out cautiously, Grace let out a low, warning rumble, a clear sign of her displeasure at this intruder. In her sacred space, she paced the fence line, her powerful form a display of defensive authority. It seemed the introduction was destined for failure, but then Leo did something extraordinary. He had been sketching furiously in his notebook as the new bull arrived. Now he tore the page out and held it up to the fence for Grace to see. It was a drawing, not just of Grace, not just of Kai, but of a third, smaller bison, a calf nestled safely between the two of them. It was a drawing of a family, of a future. Grace stopped her pacing. She looked from the drawing in the small boy's hand to the nervous young bull in the adjacent pasture, then back to the boy who had shared his silence with her for weeks. A long, slow moment passed, then Grace relaxed her tense posture. She walked to the fence separating her from Kai and let out a soft rumble. It was not a warning, it was an invitation, a question. Leo watched, his eyes wide, and for the first time in 6 months, a sound escaped his lips. It was not a word, but a soft gasp of pure wonder, a tiny seed of a voice returning to the world. Maya Flores stood back and watched the scene unfold with tears in her eyes. The Bison Queen, the silent boy, and the hopeful new king stood at the threshold of a new beginning. The legacy was not just a story to be told, it was a living, breathing force of healing that continued to create miracles on this patch of Texas soil. The family that a cowboy and a bison had forged in trauma and forgiveness was about to be reborn, proving that the deepest love never truly dies, it simply finds a new heart to call home. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.